Welcome to Life Stories, where extraordinary tales of love, resilience, and transformation come to life. Today's story takes us into the world of Lucas Cole, a wealthy businessman, and Ivy Hanover, a resilient young woman with a hidden past. What starts as a cold, calculated contract blossoms into a heartwarming journey of trust, forgiveness, and love. Through unexpected challenges and powerful emotions, their lives intertwine in ways they never imagined. Stay tuned to uncover how their remarkable story unfolds. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Stories. Let's begin today's inspiring tale. The skyline of New York City glittered like a crown of jewels under the night sky. Yet Lucas Bennett stood in his penthouse, feeling as though the weight of the world pressed on his shoulders. The air inside the sleek, marble-clad living room felt heavy, suffused with tension as Eleanor and Richard Bennett, his impeccably dressed and stoic parents, sat before him. "You will marry Savannah Whitfield, Lucas," Eleanor said, her voice sharp and unyielding, like the heels of her designer stilettos clicking against the marble floor. Her words were a decree, not a suggestion. Lucas ran a hand through his neatly styled dark hair, his jaw clenched in defiance. "And what if I don't? What if I refuse to let you dictate my life like it's just another corporate merger?" Richard leaned forward, his towering presence casting a long shadow over Lucas. His deep voice resonated with authority. "Then you can consider yourself cut off. From the family. From the company. From everything. This isn't just about you, Lucas. It's about securing the future of Bennett Enterprises." Lucas scoffed, pacing near the floor-to-ceiling windows. Beyond the glass, the city sparkled with opportunity. But inside, he felt caged. "You're asking me to sacrifice my happiness for a business deal. Do you even hear yourselves? Savannah is a stranger to me. She's just another pawn in your game." Eleanor's gaze didn't falter. "Happiness is fleeting, Lucas. Stability is what matters. Savannah's family brings that. Together, the Whitfields and Bennetts can ensure a legacy that will last for generations." He stopped pacing and turned to face them, his frustration boiling over. "What about my legacy? What about what I want for my life? Or does that not matter as long as the company's stock prices stay high?" His parents exchanged a glance, a silent, imperious understanding passing between them. Finally, Eleanor stood, smoothing her tailored blazer. "This conversation is over. You know what's expected of you. Make the right choice, Lucas." As the heavy door of the penthouse clicked shut behind them, Lucas exhaled sharply, running his hands over his face. For the first time in years, he felt powerless in his own life. The glittering success he had built, the sleek towers and glowing accolades, it all felt meaningless under the weight of his parents' control. Later that evening, he found himself wandering the streets of Manhattan. The city hummed with life, the bustling sidewalks and honking taxis a far cry from the pristine silence of his penthouse. The cold wind bit at his skin as he walked aimlessly, his mind racing with thoughts of rebellion and escape. Turning a corner, he stopped in his tracks. A young woman sat on the sidewalk, leaning against the side of a building. Her backpack, frayed and worn, rested beside her, and her oversized jacket did little to shield her from the biting cold. Her head lifted as he approached, revealing striking green eyes framed by messy brown hair. Her gaze was wary but steady. "Spare any change?" she asked, her voice soft but unwavering. Lucas hesitated, studying her. Her presence seemed out of place, as if she belonged in a different story entirely. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman frowned, clearly unaccustomed to such questions. After a pause, she replied, "Ivy." Lucas crouched slightly to meet her gaze, a wild idea forming in the recesses of his mind. "Ivy," he repeated, his tone thoughtful. "What if I told you I could change your life?" Her brow furrowed, suspicion flashing in her eyes. I'd say you've been watching too many movies. He let out a short laugh. Fair. But I'm serious. What if I told you I could get you off the streets? Give you a place to live? Food. Clothes, everything you need to start over? Her wariness deepened. What's the catch? Lucas straightened, shoving his hands into the pockets of his coat. You marry me. For 1 year. Ivy stared at him, her expression shifting from disbelief to bewilderment. Excuse me? I'm not crazy, he said quickly, sensing her disbelief. It's just a business arrangement. I need a wife. And you need a fresh start. After a year, we'll go our separate ways. No strings attached. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. This is some kind of joke. Right. Marry you? A total stranger? Lucas's tone softened, though his determination remained. I'll draw up a contract. You'll be protected. And I'll pay you enough to get back on your feet. You don't have to decide right now. Just think about it. Ivy looked away, her fingers tightening around the straps of her backpack. The offer was absurd, almost laughable. But then again, so was her reality. She had nothing to lose and maybe everything to gain. Finally, she met his gaze, her green eyes searching his face for any trace of insincerity. Why me? Lucas hesitated, caught off guard by the question. He couldn't tell her the full truth, that she was different from anyone in his world, that she represented something real in a life full of pretense. Instead, he said simply, because you don't know me. You don't care about my money or my status. And you've got nothing to lose. For a moment, Ivy was silent, weighing her options. Then, with a reluctant sigh, she nodded. Fine. But if you're lying, I'm out. I'm not. Lucas promised, extending a hand. As they shook hands, the gravity of their deal settled over them like the chill in the air. Neither of them knew it yet, but this moment would set in motion a chain of events that would change their lives forever. The next morning, Ivy stepped into Lucas Bennett's penthouse and felt as though she'd stepped into another world. The sleek, minimalist design, accented with marble and glass, reflected the dazzling sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The view of Manhattan stretched endlessly, almost mocking her for how far she'd come from the streets below. She stood hesitantly in the entryway, clutching the straps of her worn backpack, her gaze darting between the luxurious furnishings. Lucas leaned casually against the kitchen counter, watching her reaction with an amused smile. Welcome home, he said, gesturing toward the spacious living room. Make yourself comfortable. Comfortable. The word seemed absurd in a place like this. Ivy nodded stiffly and stepped further inside, feeling out of place amidst the grandeur. This is a lot, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas chuckled, pouring himself a cup of coffee. You'll get used to it. Think of it as part of the arrangement. Ivy raised an eyebrow, the faintest hint of defiance sparking in her green eyes. Right. The arrangement, she muttered, letting the words hang in the air. Over the next few days, their differences became glaringly obvious. Lucas moved through life with the ease of someone who had always known privilege. He wore his confidence like armor, navigating the corporate world with an assuredness Ivy couldn't fathom. In contrast, she spent her days trying to navigate her new reality, one filled with wealth, extravagance, and expectations she hadn't anticipated. Despite her attempts to adapt, Ivy found herself clinging to remnants of her old life. She insisted on cooking her own meals, much to the dismay of Lucas's housekeeper. I don't need someone to do everything for me, she said one morning, determinedly cracking eggs into a frying pan. Lucas leaned against the counter, his arms crossed and a smirk playing on his lips. You're burning those. By the way. Ivy glared at him, her cheeks flushing as she scraped the charred remains from the pan. I don't need your commentary, Mr. Perfect. He laughed, the sound surprisingly warm. Suit yourself. But you might want to let Maria handle breakfast next time. The tension between them was palpable. But beneath it lay something else, a growing respect. Lucas admired Ivy's resilience. Her refusal to let her circumstances define her. And Ivy, though still skeptical of his intentions, began to see glimpses of vulnerability beneath his polished exterior. One evening, unable to sleep, Ivy wandered into the living room and found herself drawn to the old upright piano tucked into the corner. Her fingers hovered over the keys before she began to play, a haunting melody filling the empty space. She lost herself in the music, her emotions pouring out through the notes. She didn't notice Lucas standing in the doorway until the piece ended. "You're incredible," he said softly. Ivy jumped, turning to face him. Her cheeks flushed. "I didn't know anyone was listening." "I didn't know you could play," he replied, stepping closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" "It's just something from my past," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Something I don't really talk about." Lucas studied her, sensing there was more to the story but choosing not to press. "Well, you should play more often. You're amazing." His words lingered in the air, and for the first time, Ivy felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, trust. But trust was fragile, and Ivy knew she carried secrets that could shatter it. She hadn't told Lucas who she really was, Ivy Hanover, the daughter of disgraced business mogul Jonathan Hanover. She had spent years distancing herself from the scandal that had ruined her father and destroyed her family. And now, standing in Lucas's world of power and wealth, she feared what would happen if the truth came out. For now, she told herself, she could keep the past buried. But as her connection with Lucas deepened, Ivy began to wonder how long she could keep pretending. The charity gala was a whirlwind of lights, laughter, and opulence. Ivy felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach as she stepped out of the car, the hem of her borrowed evening gown brushing against the pavement. She wasn't sure how Lucas had convinced her to come, but as they walked arm in arm into the grand ballroom, she couldn't deny the sense of dread curling in her chest. Lucas leaned down slightly, his voice low and steady. "Relax. You'll be fine. Just smile and nod. Let me do the talking." "Easy for you to say," Ivy muttered, forcing a smile as they were greeted by waves of impeccably dressed guests. The opulence of the event was overwhelming. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, and soft classical music played in the background. Ivy felt like an imposter, but Lucas's steady presence beside her was her only anchor. As the evening progressed, Ivy surprised herself and Lucas. Her natural charm and quick thinking drew the admiration of several influential guests. She managed to hold her own in conversations with people she would have otherwise found intimidating, even earning a few genuine laughs from Lucas's usually skeptical business associates. By the time they reached his parents, Margaret and Gregory Cole, the air around them was thick with tension. Margaret's polished smile was thin and cold, her eyes assessing Ivy with the precision of a jeweler examining a flawed gem. "Your wife has quite the presence," she remarked to Lucas, her tone devoid of warmth. "Quite the charmer." "Yes," Lucas replied smoothly, his gaze lingering on Ivy with a hint of pride. "She is." Margaret's smile tightened. Later in the evening, she pulled Ivy aside, her voice dripping with condescension. "You played your part well tonight," she said, her icy blue eyes boring into Ivy's. "But don't think for a second that I'm fooled. I know there's more to you than meets the eye." Ivy's breath hitched, but she kept her composure. "Good luck with that," she replied evenly, turning on her heel and walking away. Back at the penthouse, Ivy's nerves were frayed. She tried to brush off Margaret's words, but the weight of her past pressed heavily on her. Lucas noticed her quiet demeanor as she sipped a glass of water by the kitchen counter. "You okay?" he asked, his voice unusually soft. "Yeah," she said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." Lucas didn't press, but Ivy could sense his concern. As she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, she knew her secrets wouldn't stay hidden forever. Margaret's probing gaze and sharp words made that clear. If the truth about her father came out, it could destroy everything. The storm hit faster than she expected. Just days after the gala, Lucas received a call from his mother, summoning him to the Cole family estate. When he arrived, he was met with Margaret's cold, triumphant expression and a thick dossier spread across her desk. "Your wife," Margaret said. Her voice clipped. "Is Ivy Hanover. Ring any bells?" Lucas froze, his mind racing as he scanned the documents. Headlines screamed from the pages: "Hanover Empire collapses in fraud scandal." The face staring back at him was unmistakably Ivy's, though younger and surrounded by the chaos of her family's downfall. "Why didn't she tell me?" Lucas murmured, his voice tight. "Because she's using you," Margaret said sharply. "She's clawing her way back to respectability. And you're her ticket. You've been played." Lucas stormed out, his emotions a whirlwind of betrayal and disbelief. When he returned to the penthouse, Ivy was in the living room, sketching on a notepad. She looked up at him, her expression softening until she saw the intensity in his gaze. "What's wrong?" she asked cautiously. Lucas crossed his arms, his voice colder than she'd ever heard it. "Why didn't you tell me who you really are?" Ivy froze, her breath catching. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb." "Ivy," Lucas snapped. "You're Ivy Hanover, the daughter of Jonathan Hanover, the man who ruined countless lives. Why didn't you tell me?" Ivy's face paled, but she stood her ground. "Because it's not who I am," she said, her voice trembling. "I've spent my entire life trying to escape my father's shadow. That name destroyed everything I had." Lucas's anger battled with a flicker of understanding, but his frustration won. So none of this was real. It was all just convenient. Ivy's chest heaved as she fought back tears. "You don't get it, do you? You came to me. You needed me. And somewhere along the way, I thought you saw me for who I am. But I was wrong." Before Lucas could respond, Ivy grabbed her backpack and headed for the door. "Goodbye, Lucas," she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. As the door closed behind her, Lucas sank onto the couch, his heart heavy with regret. He stared at a photo of them from the gala, her radiant smile making his earlier accusations feel hollow. For the first time, he wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. The days that followed were marked by an oppressive silence in Lucas's penthouse. The grand piano in the corner stood untouched, a reminder of the vibrant presence that had once filled the space. Lucas found himself drawn to the memories of Ivy, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about music, the determination that shone through her guarded demeanor. The truth of her past didn't define her, it only made her strength more profound. And he had been too blinded by his own fears to see that. Lucas sought solace in the familiar rhythm of his work. But the emptiness lingered. Each meeting, each deal felt hollow without her sharp wit and quiet resilience to balance his world. His mother's words rang in his ears. But so did Ivy's. "I've spent my whole life trying to escape the shadow of my father's mistakes." He knew he had to make amends. But it couldn't be with empty words. Ivy had given him her trust, and he'd shattered it. If he wanted to fix things, he needed to do more than just apologize. "Clara," Lucas said one afternoon, pacing his office. Clara, his loyal assistant, raised an eyebrow as she watched him wear a groove into the floor. "I need your help." "With what? Exactly?" she asked, though the knowing look in her eyes betrayed her suspicion. "I need to make things right with Ivy," Lucas admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I was wrong. About her. About everything." Clara leaned back in her chair, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "Well, it's about time you figured that out. So, what's the plan?" Lucas hesitated, then said, "Music. It's her world. Her heart. I need to show her that I see her, really see her. And I need her to see that I believe in her." Inspired, Lucas threw himself into the effort. He made calls, pulled strings, and reached out to contacts in the music industry. Slowly, he pieced together an idea, a private concert. One that would give Ivy the platform to showcase her talent. It wouldn't erase the hurt he'd caused, but it would be a start. Meanwhile, Ivy was finding her own way. She returned to her music, playing at small venues and rediscovering the passion that had once defined her. Each performance was a reminder that her identity wasn't tied to her father's name or Lucas's expectations. She was her own person, and she was determined to prove it. 2 weeks later, Ivy received an unexpected invitation. It was a handwritten note delivered to her modest apartment. The message was simple but compelling. Ivy, you deserve to be seen. Please come to the Grand Avenue Theatre tomorrow at 7 p.m. Lucas. Her initial instinct was to dismiss it. Lucas had hurt her, and she wasn't sure she could trust him again. But something about the note, about the vulnerability in those words, made her pause. The following evening, Ivy stood outside the theatre, her heart pounding as she debated whether to step inside. Finally, with a deep breath, she pushed open the doors. The space was intimate yet elegant, bathed in soft golden light. A grand piano stood center stage, and the small audience consisted of industry professionals and familiar faces she admired. Ivy's breath caught as realization dawned. Lucas appeared at her side, his expression nervous but sincere. "This is for you," he said, his voice steady despite the tension between them. "I wanted the world to see what I see every time you play. This is your dream, Ivy. Let me help you achieve it." Her heart raced, emotions swirling as she took in the sight before her. Lucas stepped closer, his voice softening. "I fell in love with you, not your name, not your past, just you. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving it. If you'll let me." Tears filled Ivy's eyes, but she didn't look away. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You didn't just give me a chance. You gave me back my dream." The night became a turning point for both of them. Ivy took the stage, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the piano keys. But as she began to play, all her doubts melted away. The haunting melody filled the theatre, captivating the audience and earning thunderous applause when she finished. As the crowd dispersed, Lucas waited near the stage. Ivy approached him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and caution. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I did," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "Because you're worth it." For the first time in weeks, Ivy felt the weight of her defenses ease. "Maybe we both are," she said, a small, hesitant smile curving her lips. In that moment, they both knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. But together, they were willing to try. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Lucas's penthouse, casting a golden hue on the polished floors. Ivy stood by the grand piano, her fingers lightly brushing the keys. It was strange to think how much had changed since the first time she had set foot in this place. Back then, she had been guarded, cautious, and unsure of what to make of Lucas and his world. Now, though she still carried pieces of those uncertainties, there was something else, hope. Lucas entered the room, his usual confident stride tempered with something softer. "Morning," he said, his voice warm. "Morning," Ivy replied, offering a faint smile. She turned back to the piano, her hands still resting on the keys. "Do you ever think about how all of this started? How absurd it was?" Lucas chuckled, leaning against the doorway. "More than you know. A fake marriage to avoid a merger. It sounds like the plot of a bad rom-com. But it wasn't fake," Ivy said quietly, her gaze meeting his. "Not entirely." The vulnerability in her voice struck Lucas, and he crossed the room to stand beside her. "No," he admitted, his tone sincere. "Not entirely." The weeks that followed their reconciliation were a whirlwind of changes. But this time, they faced them together. Ivy's performances gained traction, and her music began to reach audiences far beyond the small venues where she had started. Lucas, ever her biggest supporter, attended every show, often standing at the back of the room with a quiet pride that spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, Lucas took steps to address his own battles. For years, his parents had loomed over his decisions, their expectations suffocating. But now, with Ivy by his side, he found the courage to push back. One evening, as the three of them sat down for dinner at the Cole estate, a rare occurrence. Given their strained relationship, Margaret broke the silence. "I have to admit," she said, her gaze on Ivy, "I misjudged you." Ivy blinked, startled by the unexpected acknowledgement. "You did?" Margaret nodded, her tone softening. "I was wrong about you. You've shown strength and grace I didn't think possible." And, she hesitated, her eyes flicking to Lucas. "You've brought out the best in my son. For that, I'm grateful." Lucas reached for Ivy's hand under the table, giving it a reassuring squeeze. For the first time, the tension that had always defined his relationship with his parents began to ease. A year to the day after their initial agreement, Lucas planned a surprise for Ivy. She had just finished a sold-out performance at a grand concert hall, the applause still ringing in her ears, when a stagehand approached with a bouquet of roses. As she turned a corner backstage, she froze. The stage had been cleared, and Lucas stood in the center, holding a small velvet box. The remaining crew and a few close friends watched from the wings. "Lucas," Ivy whispered, her voice trembling. He smiled, his eyes warm. "A year ago, we started something that was supposed to be temporary, a deal. But somewhere along the way, you became my everything. You made me see the world differently. You made me better." Dropping to one knee, he opened the box to reveal a simple yet elegant diamond ring. "Ivy Hanover," he said, his voice steady. "Will you marry me again? This time, for real. For forever." Tears streamed down Ivy's cheeks as she laughed softly, nodding. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Lucas. But no more contracts." The small audience erupted into cheers as Lucas slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss. It was a moment neither of them would ever forget. Their wedding, held under the stars in a lush garden, was a celebration of love, resilience, and second chances. Guests from all walks of life gathered to celebrate their union. Lucas's business associates, Ivy's friends from the music world, and even a few former rivals. It was a night filled with laughter, tears, and the kind of joy that only comes from overcoming the hardest challenges together. As the reception wound down, Lucas and Ivy shared their first dance beneath a canopy of fairy lights. The soft strains of a string quartet filled the air, but for the two of them, the world had narrowed to just this moment. "I can't believe how far we've come," Ivy whispered, her head resting against Lucas's shoulder. Lucas smiled, his arms tightening around her. "I can. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Ivy laughed softly, tilting her head to meet his gaze. "And to think it all started with a crazy deal." As they swayed together under the twinkling lights, Lucas and Ivy knew their journey wasn't over. But for the first time, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. As Lucas and Ivy danced under the twinkling fairy lights, their journey came full circle, from a contract born out of necessity to a love that defied all odds. Their story reminds us that even in the most unexpected circumstances, love, resilience, and trust can create something extraordinary. Their journey wasn't just about finding each other, it was about discovering their true selves and the power of second chances. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales. Stay tuned for the next story that will captivate your soul.